Very exciting start.
A little bit anticlimactic, right?
Is Bitcoin going to $1 million before the end of 2025? That is what we're here to discuss today.
Yeah, I guess it depends on the currency. Well, okay, I see that we're fully live. So thank you both, Yago and Willem, for joining me. This is kind of the first series of a show I'm starting called Cozy and Curious, because I usually do a lot of marketing content, and a lot of the people who watch are crypto marketers. And because we work in crypto marketing, there's so much technical nuances we need to know about the latest in infra. And I also just have a ton of questions. So the way this show kind of popped off was I once sent Alicia a ton of questions about, I made a list called my Bitcoin dumb questions. I was like, okay, the Bitcoin I know, there's 21 million supply, and I know I'm going to be dead. It'll be 2140, or maybe I will be alive because I merged with AI. Who knows? We can talk about that. But when it's fully up, what will happen? What's the point for miners? Does that mean that by then we're just going to be living in a different dimension? We don't need Bitcoin anymore. And then that branched out into, she gave me some answers, and she was like, you should have Willem on. And then Hillary introduced me to you, Yago. Seems like you know a lot about Bitcoin and how all of this confluences with where AI is going and quantum computing. So I have a ton of questions. A lot of them for you might be dumb, but I imagine some people might wonder them as well, or maybe it's just me. So I guess where I'd like to start is actually with BitcoinFi. I don't know if that is even the term you align with at Botanix or at BitcoinOS. Outside of describing how the technology is built, I'd love to actually know, first off, what will I be able to do on Bitcoin with either of your products? Maybe Yago, you can start with BitcoinOS. What will I be able to do on Bitcoin with BitcoinOS?
Well, I'll go in BitcoinOS, and the reason we call it BitcoinOS is because we're turning Bitcoin into a generalized operating system for all compute. So the short answer to what will you be able to do with Bitcoin on BitcoinOS is everything. Maybe it's worthwhile like discussing what you can do with Ethereum and what you can do with Solana and how that works for a second, just so we can give some context. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because like everything is loaded, you know, like I'm thinking like, okay, can I garden with Bitcoin now? Can I go jet skiing with Bitcoin? So yeah, maybe we start there because that is another question. It's like anything I can do on Ethereum and EVM or alt VMs, I can do on Bitcoin.
So it's very interesting that you say gardening, right? Because I'm really into gardening. I have a small farm, and my intention is to be gardening in the future. Like I basically live off grid, but I don't. But it's backbreaking work, and the slugs eat all my stuff, and I don't have the time to run after them and get rid of the slugs. And I don't like using poison because I don't want to poison the soil, etc., etc. So what is the solution? Well, the solution is that I'm going to be running my farm robotically, right? I'm going to have androids, I'm going to have tiny little drones, and there'll be little drones that come and pick up the slugs and, you know, give them to the ducks. You know, I don't know if this is going to happen in 2 years or 3 years, but it's happening. Okay, so now we have to control that system, and that probably means that I need to talk to a whole bunch of other companies and other systems that are sort of providing that compute. And I don't want my drones to turn on me, because that would be bad. Then they would take over the farm, and I would be the one, you know, dealing with the slugs and working for them. So how can I make sure that my digital property and my farm is my property, you know, with assurance? Well, we have a digital system which is designed to provide digital property rights, and that is Bitcoin. And so my intention is to be able to utilize my Bitcoin wallet to basically control all of the AI systems that I'm going to be using. My self-driving car, right? I want it to be a self-driving car, not an Elon Musk is driving me around car and decides where I go and where I don't go. So, you know, so we're going to want to have open source driving cars. We're going to want to have open source robotics. I'm going to want my own personal drone swarm as my bodyguard, right? Because I'm sitting on a bunch of Bitcoin. So all of that stuff needs to be controlled through some kind of system, which utilizes digital assets and private private key cryptography, and there is no better system than Bitcoin. So jet skiing is the one thing that you won't be doing on Bitcoin.
Okay, so it sounds like I can garden on this future of your Bitcoin, but I can't jet ski. Willem, I'd love to hear from you because Yago, that was incredible. That just opened so many other questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's funny you mentioned gardening because, of course, botanics comes from botanical, which is, of course, very close to that. What can you do with Botanix when it's live? And yeah, I mean, as Yago said, almost everything. The idea of Bitcoin is that you indeed eventually become the money all across the world, so that every transaction you ever do as a person or as a machine will use Bitcoin for it. And so you create this whole world over the internet where constantly lots of transactions keep happening, including different type of smart transactions, like you would use smart contracts for it. And that's a very long-term vision. That's 50 years ahead, 100 years ahead, right? I won't say 2 or 3 years, like yeah, I'm a little bit more skeptical in terms of the timeline. But that's fully a future I believe in. I think that will absolutely happen. And so in the next few years, practically what you will be able to do with your Bitcoin is very similar things on different networks you see today, like an Ethereum, like a Solana. So you'll be able to trade tokens. You'll be able to pay for coffee in certain places already. You'll be able to earn yield on your Bitcoin. I think that's something that a lot of people are still sleeping on today. Like most people still keep their Bitcoin in their cold wallet and don't earn any yield on it. You'll be able to borrow against your Bitcoin. I think this is also a very big one. For example, for a lot of people that are fully into the space, they keep everything of their savings in Bitcoin, but in the meantime, you still need to pay with your dollars or euros or other currencies, your fiat currencies. And so one thing you can do is you borrow against your Bitcoin, you borrow stable coins against your Bitcoin, you turn that into fiat currencies, and now you can use it in the real world. So you don't have to sell your Bitcoin when you want to buy something in the real world. If you want to buy a car or something, or even for the more wealthy Bitcoiners, if you want to buy an apartment in the real world, now you can borrow against your Bitcoin. And so there's a whole financial system slowly being created on these other networks that don't exist yet on Bitcoin. Bitcoin has always been very hard to build on. We've seen very little adoption on applications on Bitcoin, while we've seen a lot of adoption of applications outside of Bitcoin. Even the last 8 to 8 months, I think we've seen prediction markets gain a lot of adoption. And so all of these applications don't exist with Bitcoin. And so we're in this paradox moment now, as I call it. On the one hand, Bitcoin is by far the best money. Everybody sees that, but it's not used in this new financial system, all these new applications. And so how does that make any sense? And so what Botanix does is basically bridging that paradox, and now you'll be able to use your Bitcoin for all of these applications.
I'd love to understand that gap a bit more, right? Because when I think of DeFi, I think of EVMs and alt VMs, and it's only been recently when I met Alicia that and was on a Bitcoin panel with her of like, oh wait, we can do all of these things on Bitcoin. So what were those missing ingredients? Is it something that the tech was lacking when Satoshi put out the white paper? What did we not have before that even gave birth to EVMs and all of these other networks that we have right now?
Yeah. So go ahead, Will.
No, you can go ahead.
No, I insist.
Okay. So this might be a little bit more technically. Fundamentally, Bitcoin and Ethereum are completely different. You have Bitcoin, which is UTXO model, and you have the EVM and Ethereum that's more like a state machine. UTXO is like cash. In the cash in the real world, you can split it up into bills, into coins, and that's how you pay someone. That doesn't exist in Ethereum. You just have one big wallet with your account. And Ethereum and the EVM have been made to actually very easily code smart contracts. Building a smart contract on Ethereum with Solidity is very easy. It's very hard to make it secure, but it's very easy to just randomly code a random contract. On Bitcoin, you're not fully Turing complete. And so I think throughout the years, while it was really hard to build on Bitcoin and a lot of different opcodes have been removed by Satoshi, people started building on Ethereum just because it's much easier. And that's how we ended up in this interesting world. Now the EVM is not really connected to Ethereum, the asset. There are different things. The EVM is Ethereum virtual machine. It's what you would call the operating system of Ethereum. Actually, all these virtual machines, the best way to think about it is an operating system, like you have Android, like you have your Windows. Those are the operating systems. Now, there's no token, there's no coin in there. What you pay for that operating system is gas fees. In Ethereum, that's Ethereum. But you can take the Ethereum virtual machine and bring that actually to Bitcoin. And that's what a lot of people have been doing now. And so now you can use Bitcoin as the gas fees to run that virtual machine. That's a more technical explanation.
So I think I'm going to try and simplify it even a little bit further. So there is verifiable transactions, right? What is Bitcoin for? What does it do? It provides for verifiable ownership and verifiable transactions, right? I know if I own BTC, and I know that if I send you the BTC, I don't own it anymore, and now you own it, right? Okay, so for a long time, people have been saying, this is amazing. Imagine we could do more than just hold or send some asset, right? In fact, the first person who said, you know what would be amazing? What would be amazing is if you could actually do something with your BTC, was Satoshi Nakamoto. And how do we know this? Because he was thinking about this even before he launched Bitcoin. In the very first version of Bitcoin, version 0.1.0, not only did Satoshi introduce the first blockchain, the first cryptocurrency, the first decentralized ledger, he also introduced the first dApp, and it was called Poker Lobby, right? And it was supposed to be a poker game that you could play in a decentralized way across anywhere in the world using BTC. And the reason he added, or the reason he intended to add it, was because he wanted there to be something from day one that you could do with your BTC, but he removed it. And he removed it because he realized that the way he had built it, where he wrote it into the chain, would not scale. All right, so fast forward 4 years, people have been banging their head against this problem. They're like, okay, how do we build applications? How do we build an economy? How do we build services that actually interact with this ledger? And then Vitalik says, all right, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I've got a solution, and here's my solution. I'm going to take all of the software, all of it, and I'm going to shove it into the chain, right? So that we won't just have verifiable transactions and verifiable ownership, we will also have verifiable compute, right? So because the entire computation is being rerun by everyone, this, what we call a smart contract, is just software. And so when you shove that whole piece of software into the chain, what happens is that every single full node, every single validator has to rerun every single computation that is done. So if you do a trade, that's a computation. If you create a DAO, that's a computation. If you vote on the DAO, that's a computation. If the DAO does something because of the vote, that's a computation. And that computation, all of those computations, need to be rerun again and again and again and again and again and again by thousands of computers. So that's the reason that smart contracts, that's the reason that Ethereum doesn't scale. It's the reason that Solana keeps going down. Like anytime like people actually try to use it en masse. It's because that system of replicating the compute in order so that everyone can verify that it happens doesn't work. Okay, so that's the paradigm that we've had for the last 10 years. But it turns out that there's a different way you can use verifiable compute. There's a different way you can create verifiable compute. And this way is you can just have like a single computer or a small number of computers run that piece of software off-chain, somewhere else, on your computer, on your phone, wherever. But if they then can cryptographically prove that that computation was run the way it was supposed to run, and then they can just post and verify that tiny little computation into the blockchain, and suddenly, instead of having to shove the entire smart contract into the blockchain in order to get verifiable compute, you get verifiable compute and you get scaling. And that is what is happening right now. So what is happening right now is when you hear about rollups and you hear about ZK proofs and you hear about all of this stuff, you hear about the fact that basically all of the transactions are migrating off chain. That is because we've realized that Vitalik's original plan just doesn't work, which is basically what Bitcoiners were saying all along. And so we're going to build a world of verifiable compute. We're going to build a world where my AI systems, I can verify that they're operating the way they're supposed to be operating, and they're killing the slugs the way they're supposed to be killing the slugs, right? But I don't have to put any of that except for the last tiny little proof on chain. And the crazy thing, the astounding thing that has happened now is that we can do verifiable compute using ZK proofs on Bitcoin as well. And so Bitcoin basically leapfrogs all of this nonsense of taking all of this, we're going to shove a VM into the blockchain. We're going to shove all of the software into the blockchain. We're going to make everything plus the kitchen sink and your jet ski goes into the blockchain, and it doesn't scale. Bitcoin is a pure play ledger. It remains a reliable piece of not software, but permaware. But now it does verifiable ownership, verifiable compute, verifiable transactions, and verifiable compute. So we get to be able to do any kind of computation we want with Bitcoin.
Okay, so I do want to go back to the drones and the bodyguards and how that's by Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But also, Willem, you mentioned something that is so fundamental that is going to be related to this next conversation, that EVM and Ethereum, they're ultimately completely different than Bitcoin, right? And Yago, you described kind of the blockchain stack, and we're seeing this a lot in the EVM and AltVM world, where there is ZK rollups now, all sorts of different layers of the blockchain stack. Some of it is going off chain. And I do want to also dig into compute a little bit, because it seems like compute doesn't just apply to blockchain cryptography and building blocks, but ultimately all of this AI stuff needs to be powered by compute and energy one day. But going back to the fundamental, like what Bitcoin is, and also I had no idea Satoshi built a poker game, so that's really fascinating. The Bitcoin that I knew was, okay, it's 21 million supply only. And I really want to talk about this because miners, they are solving these cryptographic mathematical computations to build a block on the blockchain when it comes to Bitcoin. And then they get miner rewards. And every 4 years, there's a halving cycle. And because there's scarcity, in 2140, apparently there's going to be no more rewards left. So does this actually mean Bitcoin can be changed? It sounds like we can already add other layers to it. Can we change it away from proof of stake? I'd love to understand the immutability of Bitcoin and how it plays into what either of you are building.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it's too early to discuss that. I don't believe for a second that's going to be an issue anytime soon. I think we're trying to predict what's going to happen in the year 2130. That's 100 years from now. I think it was a very good narrative when Ethereum decided to switch to proof of stake. But in the Bitcoin world, I don't think anyone has ever been worried about that. So the block reward that the miners get, so they spend energy and then they get the block reward, exists of two portions. It's one, the standard block reward, and then it's also the transaction fees. Now today, of course, the transaction fees on Bitcoin are really low because there's almost no adoption of it. Most people don't transact on Bitcoin, they hold Bitcoin. Now, that's also a chicken or the egg problem, because today there's also not that many applications you can actually do with Bitcoin. But is that going to be the case 100 years from now? I don't believe that for a second. I think what we are doing, like we're talking about bringing all these applications, all this fun stuff you can do, and bringing that to Bitcoin, and then there's still not going to be any transactions. Again, that doesn't make any sense at all. And so I think it's way too early to discuss that. I feel very confident this is not going to be an issue, and we're trying to FUD something over 100 years. Now, I do know that a lot of Bitcoiners are very ideological driven by Bitcoin itself and want to do the right thing. So if this ever would become a risk, There's of course the Bitcoin core there. There's a lot of people that can propose soft forks. So if Bitcoin is at risk, then action will be taken. And I think later on we'll also go into the quantum computing, which is actually a very similar situation. Like if Bitcoin would be at risk, then I 100% believe some people will take action, and already some individuals are taking action on that and proposing different soft forks. But that the security budget is going to run out, no, I don't believe that.
I think if we continued the way we're going now, we would have a real problem. But I said you'll be able to do any kind of compute and verify it on Bitcoin. Now, verifying compute is good in two really, really crucial ways. First of all, it means that you can build applications trustlessly interacting with Bitcoin, right? And I'm talking about Bitcoin the chain, not just BTC. I mean, like if you want to have real world assets, right? If you want to tokenize them, are you going to tokenize them on Solana? Are you going to tokenize them on Ethereum? Those things, they fork every 6 months. They change all the time. The asset that you're, like, let's say a mortgage, right? A mortgage lasts for 30, 35 years, right? I don't even know if Ethereum is going to be around in 30 years, right? I know for certainty that Bitcoin not only will be around, but will be pretty much exactly what it is today in 30 years. And so it is the only system that we have which provides really good property rights. And so it's the perfect ledger. It's a perfect global ledger for settlement and registration of significant assets, real world assets, bonds, stocks, equities, stable coins. They can and will all exist on Bitcoin. So that's a huge amount of transactional activity. And then the second thing is there's another benefit to verifiable compute, which is that sometimes you want to be able to publicly prove that you're doing something that isn't cheating. And this is actually particularly important. AI is like the general meta theme of every conversation today, but it's really important with AI. So I actually got into Bitcoin through AI. I was doing neural network modeling and building machine learning tools, and I was reading papers in network science, and I just sort of stumbled across the Satoshi white paper when I was at Carnegie Mellon in 2011. And at the time, I was convinced that it would take a while, but we were going to move to a basically entirely digital economy mediated by AI agents. And if we did this without a system of property rights, then basically it would be 5 dudes in San Francisco who would control the entire world. And we kind of don't want that. So what is the alternative? The alternative is if you're interfacing with a system, you can make sure that the system isn't cheating you in terms of the computation that it's doing, or the kind of computation it's doing, or even just the amount of computation that it's doing. And that is why verifiable compute and ZK proofs have become so important and such a topic of conversation, especially over the last couple of years. So why is this relevant to the question that you asked? Because I know I'm getting a bit long-winded here, right? The reason this is relevant is because right now we are using a very, very small fraction of a tiny amount of block space, where Bitcoin only has 4 megabytes of data availability every 10 minutes. That's nothing. And yet we're still not using all of it because people aren't doing anything with their Bitcoin. But what happens when people are not just moving their Bitcoin because they can interact with things, and are also moving other kinds of assets on Bitcoin because they can do that, and they're also using it as a general platform, a general operating system for verifiable compute? Well, what happens is, even though those individual transactions could be very, very small, they quickly fill up the block space. And then you need to start using scaling systems, which we luckily already are in possession of. But what that means is that Bitcoin's 4 megabytes every 10 minutes, that digital space is going to become the most valuable digital space in the world. So I don't think there's very much risk at all of Bitcoin miners running out of budget. They're going to become extremely wealthy in a way that they can't imagine right now.
Just to make sure both I, for one, and also whoever's watching understands what verifiable compute is, can you describe what that is? And also, does this, when you mention off-chain verifiable compute, does that mean we're actually storing some of this verification in like a centralized server, or where is this information getting stored?
Sure. So what is verifiable compute? It's compute that can't cheat you, right? The basic idea, trust but verify, right? So if you come to me, right, and I've got a calculator in my hand, and you say to me, what is 1076 divided by 3, and I give you a number, right? I'm the one holding the calculator. You don't know if I'm lying to you or not, right? But if I turn around the screen and you can see like the calculation, especially if you can see me doing the calculation, well, that's verifiable compute, right? So why is this important in our world? Because basically a smart contract is nothing more than verifiable compute. I want to make a trade, okay? And so I come to Uniswap and I say, here's my Bitcoin. Uh, Please give me the best price for my Bitcoin for, I don't know, dog with hat. I don't know why I'm selling my Bitcoin for dog with hat, but each to his own, right? So okay, and then I give you one Bitcoin and you give me one dog with hat, and I look at this and I think this doesn't look right, right? But you say no, trust me, right? That was the market price. Verifiable compute. The reason we have smart contracts is because that way I can verify that the transaction executed the way it was supposed to execute. That's why we have smart contracts. That's why we shove all of the software into a blockchain. So now to your question, can we do this off chain? Yes, we now have the techniques to be able to do this without having to shove the entire piece of software into a blockchain.
Yeah, when it's off chain though, where does it actually live, Willem? Like, is this just like stored in a server in some country I don't know, or?
Yeah, whoever did the computation. So if I want to do a computation on something with some robots somewhere, I can combine that in a proof and send that to Bitcoin, where you can then verify that. And so you don't need to have all that information to be able to verify that. Yeah.
Okay, so it sounds like there's actually going to be like a reliable compute layer where people can contribute to it. Is that what I'm hearing? It's also like a separate decentralized layer?
No, I don't think so. I think, look, basically every single blockchain is that layer that you're describing. There's a little bit more complexity to it, but basically, to first approximation, that is what every single blockchain is trying to do. It's just doing verifiable compute. That is what a blockchain is, right? It's just like, here are the computations. Now, with Bitcoin, it used to be very limited. What were the things that you could do verifiable compute of? Who was computing who owns what and computing who sent what? Now we can just make that general purpose.
Great. And then something that I want to get into as well is the quantum side, because when you're making these cryptographic computations, I don't know how far out quantum computing is, and well, and maybe it's also way too far out to care right now, but it does sound like you mentioned some people are considering soft forking or preparing for that. I've also heard of some term called post-quantum safe when it comes to ZK snarks, which is also a completely another very technical topic. But I'd love to understand, when quantum computing does come, what is that timeline, and how does it affect a lot of this computation that is happening day to day on these blockchains?
Yeah, let me maybe split that question into two. One is, when is it happening? I think that's very hard to predict. Like, we've been talking about quantum computing for 20 plus years. It's been ideas, I don't know, that go maybe further than 30 years back. However, progress keeps being made every year. And so it's very hard to predict how fast it's going to go or not. But what we do know is that ECDSA in Bitcoin, that's the elliptic curve that's being used, is broken if quantum computing becomes really successful. And so that has quite some implications. For example, and this is the second point I want to make that I think a lot of people are sleeping on, you would be able to steal all Satoshi's Bitcoin, for example. So when Satoshi was mining, they had public and private keys. And so all those, probably like a million or a few million of Bitcoin, are in very, very old wallets that with quantum computing would be able to be broken. And so the most interesting aspect now, quantum computing used to be something in universities, some niche research without a lot of funding. But now there's a direct honeypot. There is 1 million Bitcoin waiting for whoever gets to quantum computing first. And so it is a game changer, I think, in the whole quantum computing story. I think a lot more people are starting to realize, like, wait, if you are the first one to really break quantum computing, you can access those wallets. And so there's this huge honeypot and of money waiting for anyone who can help the space of quantum computing forward. And so I think a lot more money is going to go into it, and it's going to go much, much faster. And I think a lot of people in the Bitcoin space especially have been looking at it and have been proposing soft forks where you would replace the ECDSA with quantum secure signatures, for example. And so that's, I think, what's been happening. But the big realization is that there's this huge honeypot of money waiting for whoever can get to that Bitcoin.
So I'll just say two quick things about that. One, I've actually started to see proposals about ways to make Bitcoin quantum secure even without a soft fork, which I initially thought was impossible, but we've got really smart people who come up with things that we think are impossible. Second, I think it's important to recognize that quantum computing is sort of the closest thing we will probably ever come to actual magic, and it is also, because of that, extremely hard. So what is happening with a regular computer is we all know that computers work in binary, right? Something is either 1 or 0. That basically just means that you've got a logic gate. It's just like, you can think of it as a little wire. And if electric current can go from one place to another, the gate is open, right? Or the gate is closed, 1 or 0. Quantum computers don't work like that at all. What quantum computers do is they exist in some kind of fuzzy state, right? Where that logic gate, you don't know if it's closed or open. But what it's actually doing, one way to describe what it's actually doing, is it's both closed and open across an infinite number of universes, right? So we're actually reaching in to other sort of multiverses, and we're stealing their compute power. And then we're running a computation and stealing this compute power from parallel universes. That's what makes quantum computing so powerful. But the thing is that these logic gates, these quantum logic gates, which are called qubits, they are like teenagers. One of them is okay, all alone, kind of quiet, will do his work, right? But you start getting two of them together, they start talking and gossiping. You get a few together, it's a party. You get a few more, and like they're destroying the house, and the police are called. And so the problem with qubits is the more you get together, right, the more they start to interfere with each other, and it becomes exponentially hard. So we've built quantum computers with 1 or 2 or 3 sort of what are called like virtual qubits, which actually require a group of qubits. But basically, we've managed to get like 2 or 3 qubits working max. Going beyond that has proven to be very, very hard. So I actually don't think it's going to happen very, very quickly, and we're probably going to be prepared for it well before it happens.
Okay, so it sounds like, the timeline for you, Willem, is you're not sure, and for Yago, you're thinking that it's actually further out than we think. I'm curious, though, how do you even know something is quantum safe if we are making these calculations on a non-quantum computer?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to really give a good answer on that, but basically, there's certain kinds of computation that you can pull in from parallel universes. Certain kinds of algorithms that are amenable to that, and certain kinds of algorithms that really want to stay in their own universe. And so elliptic curves happen to be the kind of algorithm that, based on the kind of algorithm that you can do in parallel universes, whereas some of this post-quantum new cryptography is like very, very introverted algorithms, and they don't really want to play with other universes.
Willem, do you have an answer to that is not multidimensional by chance? Just to make sure I can absorb this better.
Yeah. Basically, what quantum computing allows you to do is to solve calculations easier, in essence. And so a lot of different algorithms work on a mathematical basis completely different. For example, hash functions is a lot of scrambling through each other. So if you want to break a hash function, you basically need to do billions of guesses and trillions, basically infinite amount of guesses. That will still stay hard in the world of quantum computing. Now, other type of mathematics, where it's basically mathematical functions like the elliptic curves, those are way easier to break because these are more mathematical functions that quantum can break. So some algorithms will be easily broken and others won't by quantum. Now, the quantum resistant cryptography is it's in its very, very young infancy. And as also is at the same reason is because quantum was always like, is it ever going to happen? So why spend a lot of research into like, how can we make something quantum resistant if we actually are not sure yet how it's going to look? And so these two spaces are growing together.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because theoretically, if somebody was able to access Satoshi's wallet, wouldn't they be able to access all of our wallets?
Not necessarily, no. The reason is that actually some of the new cryptography that we're using for some of the newer versions. So we've added new ways to create wallets. Like for example, we introduced a soft fork for Taproot, right? So you can create Taproot addresses. These addresses are constructed differently. But Satoshi, he's still sitting in the very, very, very old wallets that haven't changed at all, and so his would be the first to be cracked.
Got it. I see. So his is kind of the lowest hanging fruit.
Exactly.
I see. Okay. And going back to AI, so it's okay if neither of you know this, but I am curious. Maybe you have a lot more thoughts than I do. What happens when AI starts to work off of a quantum computer? Now that I know, like, quantum computing is in multiple dimensions. And then the AI.
What happens when you get godlike intelligence combined with magical powers? I think your guess is as good as mine.
Fair enough. Well, okay, let's go back to AI and Bitcoin then, because right now there's a ton of AI agents built on EVMs and alt VMs and a lot of EVM L2s. And currently, right now, there is also some good questions here about. I think you two also alluded to it, that Bitcoiners, they tend to be holders. They can tend to be Bitcoin maxis. And it seems like everything I can do on Ethereum right now or ETH L2s, I could eventually do on Bitcoin or maybe do it right now. Are there any AI agents being launched on Bitcoin? Are you designing it differently than how EVM would look like? Or what is the future state of how you envision that?
Let me answer that twofold. I think I want to first bring it a little bit to a higher level. I think when you think about AI and cryptocurrencies, it's actually very interesting. We're back in this world where when you think about AI and 10 years from now, the amount of data that is being generated is huge. And so if you try to imagine 10 years from now, we're already creating so much fake text, fake video. Isn't the whole internet just going to be filled with absolute garbage, and it's impossible for anyone to know anymore what's real or not? Even this live stream, this could be fully AI generated. And so
I have the craziest story about that. Well, I'll get
and so when you think what's going to be possible in 5 to 10 years from now, like, is the internet going to be filled with complete garbage if it's so cheap to create information? Right. And so that's a little bit what some people might know as that internet theory. Now, on the other hand, and this is very interesting in history again, you have AI. Oh, is this flipped? Not sure. Yeah. AI basically making the cost of creating information on the internet is going to zero very fast. Right. And the only thing that stands against it is crypto. If you want to transact or send something over the internet, you need to pay transaction fees for it. And so these two worlds will eventually converge. The only way to start transacting over the internet is, again, to pay for transactions, is to pay to send information. That's how you will be able to validate certain information. That's how you will be able to validate what's been happening. And so if you follow that theory to the extreme, eventually everything will happen on blockchains. Because all the rest of the internet is filled with absolute garbage. You'll need to pay again for the block space. And so I think AI and crypto are still very separate worlds. Now we've seen the first AI agents transacting on there, but eventually these two worlds will absolutely and massively converge. And now to answer your actual questions, have we seen AI agents on Bitcoin? I might have missed it because there's a lot of things always happening in the world of crypto. I absolutely think that if it hasn't happened yet, a lot of AI agents will absolutely exist. We've seen them exist on Ethereum and Solana. So anything that's possible there, like we've said in the beginning, will come to Bitcoin. And I actually strongly believe a lot of the transactions that we'll see over the next 20 years will be actually agents talking to agents, machines paying other machines.
We actually have a number of projects working on building AI agents for Bitcoin using BitcoinOS. One of them is pretty famous right now, which is like Eliza OS AI 16Z. But there's a whole bunch of projects currently working on pretty interesting ways of using Bitcoin and BTC staking for AI.
So is it the same functionality as what Eliza or A16Z is doing on EVM? I think they're on Base right now, or Solana. They're on Solana. They came from DAOs.fun.
Yeah, basically it's the same idea, right? So the idea is you can have agents which will perform actions for you. That could be, reporting on what's happening on the blockchain. It could be performing transactions for you. It could be trading on your behalf, and in the future, potentially much more.
So that's interesting, right? Because as agents start to talk with other agents and AI becomes possibly more and more sentient as we go towards AGI, wouldn't they eventually be able to choose like, hey, you know what? I actually don't want to be on Solana anymore. I'm going to be on Bitcoin. So will we even have the free will to decide where our assets are, or will it be our agents?
Well, it depends if the assets are yours or it's the assets of the agents. I assume those agents will control their own wallets, and so absolutely, I think eventually they'll choose their most favorite blockchain, and a lot will go into it. What is the most secure? What is the most efficient? What is the cheapest to transact on?
Okay, so you mentioned staking with Eliza, and I'd love to actually ask, where does the yield come from on Bitcoin?
I can maybe answer that. I think for us, it's very easy on Botanix. So like I mentioned in the beginning, you have the EVM. To transact on an EVM, you need to pay gas fees. These gas fees will be in Bitcoin. And so these gas fees will basically accrue back to all the different stakers. So imagine on Ethereum, you stake Ethereum and you get the gas fees in Ethereum. Very, very similar will it be on Bitcoin. So you will pay the gas fees or your transaction fees in Bitcoin. And so that will accrue back to the stakers. And that's how you will actually earn Bitcoin yield in a open, permissionless fashion.
Yeah,
Is that
that's one.
OS?
Sorry?
I was just going to ask you, is that the same on BitcoinOS, Yago?
That is one way, yeah. So we're seeing projects that are building systems where fees will be earned by Bitcoin stakers. There are other things like if I want to borrow against my Bitcoin, right? Because I don't want to sell my Bitcoin. Because why would I ever sell my Bitcoin? Each Bitcoin is going to be worth $5 million. Selling now is insane. So instead I just borrow against my Bitcoin. Then I'm probably going to be paying an interest rate, right? So that allows for people who are willing to lend to earn a yield. There's perpetual markets where there's basically futures markets because people want to take a position on the future volatility of Bitcoin, and so they're willing to basically pay to kind of bring forward the volatility or protect themselves from the volatility. And so the more Bitcoin becomes this core collateral asset, the more moneyness it has, the more it is going to accrue sort of the standard yield types that we are familiar with basically any kind of commodity money. And then beyond that, I think we're going to start seeing more, even more expensive types of transactional activity on the Bitcoin network itself. And so not only you'll be able to earn with BTC, but you'll be able to invest with BTC, right? And at some point, I suspect something along the lines of 12 years from now, most projects building on BTC, which are profitable, will be able to be profitable in BTC terms, not just in USD terms. And so that will change how we think about investing. And you'll be able to start thinking about investing your Bitcoin and not just passively earning yield.
Okay, wow, very interesting. So I want to go back to just this vision of controlling my electric car, my garden, and my AI drone army swarm with Bitcoin. What are the actual limitations to get there right now? Is it software? Is it hardware? Or is it something else?
Well, the approach we've taken is very focused on being able to verify other external compute in Bitcoin using ZK proofs. And so we managed to verify the first ZK proof from Bitcoin in block 853626, which was in July at the same conference that Trump was speaking at Bitcoin National. Right. So this is, this was a problem that we thought was going to be impossible. We were working on trying to build a opcode, like a Bitcoin improvement proposal, to introduce the ability to do ZK verification. And at some point towards the end of 2023, we realized that we could probably do it without a fork, and this would open up Bitcoin massively. And so that first ZK verification that was ever done on Bitcoin, Bitcoin sort of woke up and got eyes and a brain and could suddenly start understanding things that were happening outside of itself. But that process was extremely complicated. It was 54 transactions and was hard coded to a very, very specific mathematical problem. What we're now doing is we're rolling out the operating system that allows any developer to build any kind of computation on Bitcoin. And so in a few days, actually, our testnet will be going live. A few months from now, we will be on mainnet. And at that point, Bitcoin will have entered a entirely new phase, which is that Bitcoin will have eyes and a brain to understand external computation, external systems. And that really opens up the opportunity for us to do everything. So to answer your question from a practical perspective, before the middle of this year, we will start seeing real activity.
What are you seeing at Botanix, Willem? Is it mainly the software and the research side of ZK, or is it also a mixture of hardware? And if you can explain the differences, that would be great.
It's mostly software. Hardware is always a hard part, especially if you start going into the real world with a lot of different jurisdictions. You start, when we talk about tokenized the world, you basically come into contact with actual legal laws and regulation, and that's always going to be the slow part in this whole story. Now, the software side, of course, goes much, much faster, especially if you have a permissionless networks. You can see them grow very, very fast.
So is it actually? So it sounds like there's actually a third limitation, right? Which is regulations. Do we have? Let's say that all regulations are free, everything is sovereign. Do we have the technical hardware to run and scale Bitcoin to infinity right now, or do we still need more energy, more compute, or more processing chips?
No, I think we have the compute today. I mean, running Ethereum, for example, today is a bunch of computers. You can bring all of that over. We look at how many Ethereum layer 2s there are today, or Ethereum rollups. There's at the same time somehow an infinite block space available at this moment. And so when you talk about the hurdles of the regulatory, it's mostly like you want to tokenize, for example, stocks. Like we've talked so long for the last, I think, 6 years or something about like, what if we could trade Apple stocks on a blockchain and would be open 24/7 with easy liquidity and just like immediately permissionless, open to the whole world, that anyone can trade on any stock exchange in the world. There's so many hurdles right now. The reason it hasn't happened is there's no regulatory clarity there. Although that's actually a very interesting game theory, the same game theory that actually Bitcoin follows. The first country that will fully open it up and say like, look, you get full regulatory clarity here for me, and there's going to be some broker out there keeping the Apple shares, and it's going to fully open it up. That country has a massive advantage over a lot of other countries, and so that same game theory eventually will play out.
I'd love to see that domino effect happen. There's a lot of fragmentation in the EVM and alt-VM world. Like even today, getting onto the Bear chain mainnet, I had to bridge over, and then now I have like another chain in my wallet. I already have multiple wallets. I'm wondering, is the experience on Bitcoin and BitcoinFi going to be similar to this, or is there also going to be cross-chain interop or interoperability in the Bitcoin ecosystem? What will this look like to me when it's all live?
I'm happy to take that as well. I think what we're seeing is something we've seen before with the internet. when you think about the internet in 1995 until the year 2000 or something, as long as the infrastructure of something new isn't set, the customer side is going to keep on changing. And so in crypto, our whole infrastructure keeps changing every 3 years. Like 5 years ago, it was all the Ethereum wallets, and then suddenly you had Solana, so you had Solana wallets, and now you have Berachain, so you have Berachain wallets. And so as long as the underlying infrastructure keeps changing, the customer interface needs to keep on changing. And so that's also why I believe we cannot have absolute mass adoption for 8 billion people, is as long as this underlying infrastructure keeps changing, the customer side will have to adopt, and it's going to be just keeps on being a mess. However, the moment that infrastructure starts getting fully set, that's the moment all the customer-facing applications will never change anymore, and that's when you'll see like very easy customer interface and user interface. So I think wait another few years. I think now it's clear Bitcoin has won as money. I think the rest of the infrastructure and the scaling is being built right now, and once that's built, the user side will be there very fast. That's how
I mean, like Will says, right? We actually have seen this at every single sort of computing paradigm that has ever existed, right? Mainframes, each mainframe was different. The way you hand coded for them was different. Then IBM came out with IBM 360, which was an operating system which unified the user experience and the developer experience. We had, homebrew personal computers, and like they all worked in different ways. And then Microsoft came out with MS-DOS, and there was an operating system which unified the user experience and the developer experience. Cell phones, we've got Android and iOS, right? Cloud, we've had like AWS. It's happened every single time. It hasn't happened in crypto in part because every system today is still kind of like a mainframe, right? Ethereum is trying to do everything. It's all of its compute and it's hard-coded VM, and right. So there's only one system which is large enough, has the network effects, the user base, and is credibly neutral enough that everyone can interoperate with it and accept it. And that is why we're building is called BitcoinOS. It's an operating system that can finally rationalize crypto as a whole and provide a unified user experience and developer experience, so that if you're a developer, you build one thing and you can talk to all of the users, just deploy once, and everyone can use your system. So the first thing that a lot of people have been noticing happen with BitcoinOS is like what we're seeing is like Cardano announced that they're integrating with Bitcoin through BitcoinOS, and now yesterday Arbitrum announced, and Merlin announced it, and Mode announced it, and right, and so all of these projects right now, there's a growing list. Most of the significant projects in crypto are integrating into BitcoinOS, so that that basically they can utilize Bitcoin and its security and its single system as like the central CPU and the central security module of crypto. And so what you're going to see for the first time is you're going to see Cardano being interoperable with Solana, being interoperable with Ethereum, being interoperable with Bitcoin. And in fact, all of these things will be interoperable through Bitcoin. So that what we're building actually is the first operating system for crypto.
That's wild because, for the last 3 years, you think of Arbitrum and you think this is an L2 on Ethereum. And if now these L2s can also connect with Bitcoin, it completely changes the nomenclature and what it means. I'd love to close with learning about what you're most excited about this year, and maybe also kind of the future end state, because I know a lot of this is still early infra. So Willem, I'd love to hear, what are you excited about with Botanix for this year? And also, what is that end reality going to look like?
Absolutely. What I'm excited for is we're going to mainnet very soon. So we're a fully equivalent EVM with everything running on Bitcoin. And we've already announced some very big partnerships on the Ethereum application side. And especially over the next few years, I think every EVM application is going to ask themselves the same question: what should we do about Bitcoin, the biggest market there, and should we actually deploy on a Botanix? And so what I can see happening over 4 years from now is that whole application world we've seen on the EVM will slowly shift towards Bitcoin. So I think that's what I'm excited about this year. You'll see it start happening this year. I think we'll go faster, much, much faster than people expect. And then over the next few years, that will even grow and grow. And then 30 years, 50 years from now, what I actually see happening is this is no longer an EVM. You call it an infrastructure layer that basically runs a whole financial system in the world, that runs a whole economy, that runs a whole digital economy with Bitcoin as the money. There's no such thing anymore as EVM, and it's basically just a infrastructure that powers the world with Bitcoin as the money. That's how I see it playing out.
Wow, what's your take, Yago?
I think right now there's only two things that are actually important in the world, right? Not geopolitics, not who's woke and who's not whatever gossip is happening in crypto Twitter. Basically, only two things matter. What matters is Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem and AI. These are two extremely complementary systems. AI is going to be is going to drive a change in the trajectory of our productivity and our innovation, which is going to create massive wealth on an unprecedented scale. And it's going to be very confusing to deal with, but it's going to generate massive wealth on an unprecedented scale. But AI systems are going to get commoditized. And so they're actually not going to capture the value. And so where the value is going to get captured is Bitcoin, which is the one scarce digital asset where sort of, it's the immovable object. And so I think if you want to think about try and project a few years into the future and sort of figure out what the world's going to look like, the way to think about it as a simple model is value is going to be created by AI and is going to be captured by BTC.
So I just feel like this whole thing made me really bullish on Bitcoin. And thank you so much to the both of you. I'm very excited to see how all of this plays out, especially as someone that has mainly been on the EVM and LVM side the last few years. I've always been more on the holding side on Bitcoin, and I haven't actually yet done any of these actions that I do on a daily basis on EVM and AltVMs on Bitcoin. And thank you for.
Well, none of it's on mainnet yet. Like we're so early. We're all early to Bitcoin again. It's crazy.
Wow. It's like round 2 of being early. It feels good. But yeah, thank you so much for also teaching me a bit about quantum computing and also AI. And thank you both for being on here.
Thanks for having us. It was awesome.
Great.
And Will, we should catch up. Are you in New York?
It's been a while.